Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. I want to welcome you back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Hey, listen, we're getting along with season 11, man. We're having these great discussions, and we're looking backwards, we're looking forwards, we're looking sideways. We're trying to figure out what's happening in the world, where we go, what's happening to history, what's happening to cross-cultural stuff. And so we're just having these discussions because we want to make sense of our world, and not just that, just maintain some semblance of sanity. And so we've been bringing you these exciting, scintillating conversations, and today is no different. Back in the Black Like Me podcast studios is Dr. Christy Clark-Pujara, a noted academic, personal friend, a colleague. She's also the chair of the African American History Department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Let me just tell you a little bit more about her before we bring her to the mic. Dr. Clark-Pujara is a historian of colonial North American and early American Republic. Her research focuses on the experiences of Black people in French and British North America in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. She's particularly interested in retrieving the hidden, unexplored histories of African Americans in areas that historians have not sufficiently examined, small towns and cities in the North and the Midwest. Clark-Pujara contends that the full dimension of the African American and the American experience cannot be appreciated without reference to how Black people managed their lives in places where they were few. She is committed to both academic scholarship and public history. She worked closely with the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development. She's one of the instructors in the Black History for a New Day. And her public history work also includes things like writing blogs and op-eds like Many Tulsa Massacres, How the Myth of the Liberal North Erases a Long History of White Violence, for the Smithsonian American History Magazine and the 1539 Project, Why Black Midwest and Iowa History Matters, and on and on and on. There's so many other good things that are out there. But Dr. Clark-Pujara, welcome back to Black Like Me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me.
I'm really glad to have you back here, and we're going to talk about some heavy matters about what's happening in the country. But before we jump into all of that stuff, let's laugh a little bit. Let me just throw a couple of black icebreakers at you. When you were a kid with your mom, and I'm looking forward to this answer because I know your mom, would you be given the talk before going into a department store that you better not get up in here and ask me for stuff? Would you get the talk in the car, warning you, don't be begging me for stuff and toys once we get up in here?
I got a modified version of that because my mom is a shopper, but she was like a sale and clearance shopper. So like if I asked for something that was just regular price, I knew it was going to be like, are you crazy?
Like, we're not doing that.
If I asked for something that was like on clearance, if I found something that was 75% off, there was a good chance I was getting that because she loves a good deal.
So she was like, oh, wait a minute. That's my girl. She's asking for the right kind of stuff.
Yes.
Oh. And so
instead, I got the don't wander away because I was that kid who would wander away and then like have her paged. I embarrassed her throughout many department
and have her
stores
paged
in Omaha, Nebraska. Yes, I was that kid.
In order to embarrass her?
No, just because I like to wander, and then I would freak out, and then I would have her paged.
Oh my goodness! I think I've done that a few times. I certainly have been paged, but I think I might have done that once or twice. Now this is interesting. My mom was very similar. She was a thrift shopper, estate shopper, garage sale shopper. I still wake up now, 50 years later, thinking, "Oh, this feels like a good garage sale Saturday." Like the fall Saturdays, going over into Nakoma and Sherwood, and place where they have really good junk, and we could get stuff. I still have flashbacks of that, but But she loved these. She loved these deals. She loved finding those. She loved finding those kinds of deals and stuff. And so, did you inherit any of that shopping stuff from your mom?
I actually do not enjoy shopping. My mom also loved the garage sales, but I would sit in the car and read. Mom also loved going to like Goodwills, and I would
Oh my
sit in the
gosh, they
store
would have been
and read.
friends.
And so like I don't like shopping, but I very much inherited. I'm not buying it if it's not on sale or like if there's not a coupon. And this is something that drives my husband insane. I will stalk an item until I know that. I was like, eventually Marshall's is going to put this on clearance, and then I will come back.
So you spend $10 worth of gas for $2.50
Okay, now you
discount.
sound like him. But yes, like I find it very difficult just to pay the price.
Yes.
I want it to be on clearance, on discount. I want it to be if you use your Kohl's card today, you get 20% off. I'm definitely that person.
I got you. No, I got you. I like that. So let me just stay right in this whole shopping space that we're discussing. My mom was really big on staying around her, too. So I was too young, being with a single mom, to stay home. So I grew up in Hilldale Mall. I grew up at West Town Mall. And yeah, I could tell where my mom was in the store by the sound of the sound of what the hanger, what it sounded like as she moved it, looking for a discounted item, like, like I could tell by the cadence that it was her. But I noticed some kids were allowed to run all around the store, like they were allowed to go like I'd say, "Mom, I'm going to the bathroom. Mom, I'm sitting here. Mom, don't go far." And I'm curious, for some of my white friends with children, like their children can go down to the other end of the mall and back, and not necessarily say, "Hey, Mom, here's where I am." And I'm just curious, do you think that black moms and black parents who came of age around the time our parents did wanted to make sure we were always within within eyesight, just to make sure nothing happened to us? But my mom was just really big on, she had to know where I was in a store, out in public, each moment, for like this fear of being snatched or hurt or something. So I'm just curious if you think that might have played in subconsciously to your mom, making sure you stayed nearby.
I think absolutely, because public space historically for Black people has not been safe. And so knowing where your kids are, knowing how somebody's going to treat them, how somebody's going to talk to them, what somebody would think they were up to,
Yes.
absolutely
So
plays in
interesting.
that. I mean, my kids can be in the store, but don't leave the store.
Right.
Right?
Why
Like,
would you
I
leave
need
the store?
I need to know where you are, what you're doing. And again, I worry about what people will say to them, what people will think about what they're doing in a space.
That's, my sister Laleda made a joke once. She said, when we shop, we noticed the same thing. She said, it seems like a lot of the white kids could swing on the hangers, ride the racks, do things. We said, but when they grow up, they feel like the world is their oyster. Like sometimes they're not afraid to go look over here, look over there. I wonder if the downside of that is that for our kids, we grow up being unsure of our surroundings. We were safe, but we don't feel that same liberty to say, well, let me just go launch out. Let me walk over here. What's that over there? Let me go take a look at it. I'm just wondering if you ever thought about that. We've had my family's had conversations about how that childhood experience might influence the way some of us explore our boundaries or lack of boundaries in the world around us.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that I think about, and not wanting to restrict them too much, but also weighing that against
Sure.
safety.
Right, you got to.
And I'm always concerned about what somebody says to my kids, because I am very protective of their sense of who they are.
Right. No, that makes great sense. It's funny. I'm 61 years old, and when I fly alone, I text the family and said, I made it to San Diego. I'm in my hotel. I boarded my plane. I'll text my wife, my daughter, my sister. But I think that goes back to saying, hey, Mom, I'm going over to Fred's. Hey, Mom, I'm back home. Hey, Mom, I'm going to Cub Scouts. Hey, Mom, I'm back home.
That somebody always needed to know where you were.
Everywhere I am, they know where I am.
I mean, and again, that speaks to the history of Black people in this country, all the way from, enslavement through the civil rights movement, traveling in public was not safe. It was perilous. And I remember as a kid, we would take these small vacations. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. And, depending on how my dad's side jobs went that year, we would either go to Des Moines, Iowa, to this place called Adventureland, which is like a
Sounds fun.
small version of Six Flags, or we would go to Kansas City to a place called Worlds of Fun, which was like a much bigger amusement park. But I remember my parents, whether it was this 2 to 3 hour trip or this 4 to 6 hour trip, because my dad drove slow, which also there was reasons why he was so cautious.
Because he didn't want to get
When
stopped.
he was out, driving on the road. Like we would start with these like prolonged 20-minute prayers. And we used to always, as a kid, we would get in trouble, but we were like, can we just go? Like, my mom was, let the Lord protect us on the highways and byways.
That's right.
Right. And
bind them and blind them, Jesus.
Exactly.
Don't let Smokey come.
And I remember being in graduate school in a civil rights seminar analyzing the Green Book. And then it becoming clear to me why they made such a big deal about us being out on the road.
Yes.
Because that was not a safe place, right? And that it's a holdover from that. So sometimes people don't even know why they do these things.
That's so interesting. Yes.
But we do them.
Yes. Do you know, and this is not just because I'm a pastor, but if we have a long drive, we have prayer before we get on the road. We pause in the driveway. We don't pray when we fly. We don't pray when we train. We don't pray when we walk. But when we get in that car and we're about to go on the interstate, I want you to go over the highways with us. I want you to protect us.
And why is it highways and byways? Where does
there's a passage in scripture about going into the highways and the byways and the hedges. In some translations, there's byways. And so people pull that together. Highways and byways. And it rhymes.
Because now
It's
when me
rhythmic.
and my siblings get together, we make so much fun of that. We were like, one, it should have took us an hour and a half. Two, why did we have to have these 20-minute prayer sessions before we left the house?
And look at you all now, how well you're doing, how protected you all are. You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm going to call your mom and tell her she's welcome. Oh, my goodness. Listen, I want to talk to you about what's going on inside the world. If this were, 70, 80 years ago, I would say, Dr. Clark-Pujara, they're burning the books out here. Like, they're burning this is like Fahrenheit 451 all over again, but everything is digital. So how do you describe what's happening? And I know you love the Constitution, so we're going to come back around to that as well. But just in terms of books and history, and you're a historian, and you've got to understand that we're in a history-making moment. How do you describe this if it's not burning books?
Well, we are in a moment of backlash, right? And we've had these moments of backlash before. So it reminds me of what happened after Reconstruction, right? The first 10 years of Reconstruction, you see really marked political achievements by African Americans. Something like 90% of African American men were voting during Reconstruction. So that's from 1865 to 1875. There were more Black elected politicians during Reconstruction, those first 10 years, than there are now.
Right.
If we look at how many senators there were, how many state congressmen there were more during Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877 than there are right now, right? And so the response of many white folks in the country to that real political change, Black people being engaged in the political project and having power in the political project, was a really violent racist response. That's what the Ku Klux Klan comes from, right? It's a response to Black political participation. There's the movie Django, which is, popular a number of years ago.
Right.
And one of the real critiques of that movie by historians was that there was the KKK in Django during enslavement. The KKK didn't need to exist during enslavement.
Yes.
They were just simply called the police or the, state patrol. The Ku Klux Klan, that's not me being incendiary. That's just
That's
the truth.
true. It's just true.
And so organizations like the Ku Klux Klan and white citizen councils were developed in response to Black political participation and power, right? And so the response to Black people diving headfirst into the democratic process and the representative process was a violent, racist response, right? And one of the most violent and long-lasting was that of the KKK. There was also a cultural backlash against Black people's political participation. If you ever watch movies like Birth of a Nation, which was the first blockbuster in American history in terms of like how much money was spent on the film, the kind of technology, I explain it to my students like, it's like Avatar, right? It was the first movie that had moving scenes filmed outside, right? Like it was a huge blockbuster hit. And then in later decades, you get movies like Gone with the Wind. And what they have in common is portraying Reconstruction as this terrible, dark moment in American history because Black people were politically active, right? And portraying Black people as buffoons in response to Black people doing things like expanding the public school system and public works and protection for debtors. That's what really happened in the Reconstruction governments.
Wow.
But if you watch movies like Birth of a Nation or Gone with the Wind, it's out of control Black buffoonery, right? They have a famous scene in that movie where in
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation, where Black men are literally picking their toes, drinking, and eating chicken during a legislative session.
Right.
Right. So making a mockery of what was actually a very progressive
Right.
activist government that was working and functioning well. And like I said, doing things like expanding the public school system and public works. Right. And so that was a backlash. I feel like we are in a backlash, but it's a backlash to perceived gains rather than real ones. And what I mean by that is, and I want to be really clear here, I'm not one of these people that goes, nothing's changed. Things have changed radically. I think about my life in comparison to the life of my parents. My access to higher education, my ability to move up the economic and social ladder. My life couldn't be more different from that of my parents. And, you know, I had children when there was the first Black president. When I say perceived gains, I mean, if we look at things like Black home ownership, it's not like Black home ownership soared during or after the Barack Obama presidency.
Right.
It's not like the number of Black people being incarcerated took a nosedive or Black maternal health got better. But what did happen was this perception of Black people and brown folks as well making significant gains. And I think we're in a backlash moment. We are also in the backlash of calling out wrong in public. People are very comfortable with their racism. And we had a period from, you know, the 2000s through the 2000 teens where you would be called on for being a jerk,
Right.
for being a racist. And people felt like that was oppressive
Right.
because it had never happened to them before. Like they were very comfortable being racist and horrible in public. And then you started getting called on it, and people see that as a form of oppression, which is kind of wild.
Yes, it is.
Right? And so now we're in the moment where, well, I again can be publicly horrible and nobody called me on it.
It didn't take long to get back here.
No.
You know, I want to go back to something you said a few minutes ago. For folks who think that people joined the KKK because they wanted to be hurtful and racist, it's actually worse than that. These weren't just people just being hurtful and nasty. They existed because of Black progress.
Yes.
Like that, like listeners just need to settle that in. The KKK did not exist during slavery because they were not needed.
They didn't need it.
But as Black people progressed and had land and tended land and was making wealth and creating jobs, the KKK needed to exist to keep a world order, to keep people in position.
And you see this throughout history, right? You know, whether it's, you know, towns in Florida that get burned to the ground because they're flourishing, or Tulsa, right?
Right.
Wherever you see Black progress,
Yes.
Black independence, Black autonomy, what did you see? Horrendous violence, right? And this even happens in things like, look at what happens to the Black Panthers,
Right.
right? When we really strip down and think about what the Black Panthers were doing, we want to make our neighborhoods safe. We want there to be Saturday schools and free lunch programs,
And breakfast before school.
right?
What's so frightening about that?
But you got to be at the top of the CIA's list,
Yes.
right? You see this in the 80s with the MOVE movement in Philadelphia. The only time where, we see a bomb dropped in an American city, right? Is when you see these moments of Black progress,
Right.
right? Tulsa should have been a shining example. Instead, it was attacked in the most vicious ways imaginable.
Right. Right. There are probably people who went to see Black Panther who may have questioned, could Black people create a Wakanda? The true question is, if and when we did, would white people not bomb it and try to destroy it because of its progressive nature? And so the awe of that movie is not that Black people had created that space, but it had not been infiltrated or attacked by white people to destroy that level of white progress. And so, listeners, you have to ask yourselves, not if this happened, but where were you in oblivion when it was taking place? Because it's taking place. What you're experiencing now is not just a president run amok. It's someone working at the behest of the nation in trying to squelch perceived Black progress. And that's even more diabolical than just being mean because someone's Black. The response is because people are Black and are advancing.
That they have something, I loved Black Panther. And one of the reasons why I really enjoyed it is because it was drawing on what had been, right? So I teach African American history, and I often start with Africa before European contact, right? If you look at the African kingdoms that were in existence in the ancient world, they were incredibly wealthy, they were thriving, and many of them were fairly egalitarian, right? And so, like, the idea of something like Black Panther isn't fantasy, it's just a fantastical version of places that already had existed in
exactly.
Africa. And the fact that we think about them as only fantastical is a result of colonialism, which tells a very specific story about the world, that progress only came after Europeans touched a space, which is just patently not true if you know ancient history.
I want to ask you, how does the assault on history affect the teaching and the learning of social sciences? And how's it affecting what you and your colleagues do or what you teach?
I think it's more important than ever. I think it is critical, because what consistently has happened before this really kind of public onslaught, not just on history, but I think on education, right?
For sure.
On just like knowledge in general, right? Because it's not just the arts and humanities and social sciences that are being targeted. It's all educational enterprises, right? When we're seeing the reduction of the National Science Foundation, that's biology, chemistry, physics. That's so the assault at large is on education. I think that there's often a focus on history because history is the lens in which we understand and see the world, right? So the stakes are really high. It's how I understand who I am as a person. I often describe myself as a Midwesterner or an American or a Christian, and those things only mean something in historical context. They're meaningless without it. So history tells us who we are. Like, unless you're willing to say that you are a mass of cells, history matters to you, because every descriptor you use to describe yourself relies on some kind of historical context. And so it's about the stories that we tell ourselves. And when I hear people say history is being taken away, I push back, because history is not monuments. History is not what's in museums, right? History isn't even what's in the archives. It's our understanding of who we are in a moment. And that is under attack, right? When we think about like the
Yes.
NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities, there were several projects that I was on this summer that have been canceled, right? And so we are doing modified versions of them. And I'll give you an example of what the NEH projects would be. Like, so almost every summer I do an NEH workshop for K through 12 teachers. And this is where K through 12 teachers get to learn from experts in the field. So I am an early Americanist, and I specialize in economy, politics, and slavery. So I would put together a series of lectures along with some other scholars who do their area of specialty. The K through 12 teachers come to those, they could ask us questions. We help them develop curriculum, and then that goes into the classrooms, right?
Wow.
And
Wow.
instead of amplifying that, we are eliminating that. And we're trying to find workarounds. I am doing
Eliminating it.
well, like just cutting the funding for
Yes,
it. And so what we decided to do, the group that I was working with, is forego the honorariums and open it up Zoom, and whatever teachers want to come can come. Because they would normally, what we were going to do is all meet in the Hudson Valley in New York, go to actual sites, talk about those actual sites, right? Spend days with these teachers talking through these histories. Instead, we have to do it on Zoom. Right. And this was after they were told, hey, this has been approved. The money is there. Bring you in. And this also goes to their accreditation, because these are the education credits that teachers need to stay relevant. Right. And so it's wild to think about what's happening. And even projects like, the United States is coming up on its 250th anniversary. Right. And so just interpretations of Washington and Jefferson, those got canceled too. So this is like an assault on education and knowledge at large. And I think that is the point, right? Like it's not just about, okay, we're not going to talk about Black history, which is absurd, because you can't talk about American history without talking about Black history, without talking about Native Americans, without talking about Asian Americans, without talking about Latino folks. If you are, you're telling, fantasies. You're not actually engaged in the project of learning about our past. But those stories are important because it's how we think of ourselves. And you can see it in some of the really kind of just out there things that politicians say. Like, the election in New York. People are saying, well, this is what happens when a city is run amok with immigrants. When hasn't New York City been run amok with immigrants?
It's New York City.
Like, that has always been the case, right? Between, 1880 and 1920, tens of millions of immigrants came through. That has always been. That was true in New York in 1800. That was true in New York in 1700. And it's true in New York in 2020. Right. And so they're just revealing how little they understand about the history of the nation and a city like New York City. It's always been a city of immigrants.
Right.
Please tell me this magical year where it wasn't. And it's often said by a person whose grandparents came through Ellis Island.
Man, oh man, is it crazy out here. And I don't think it's just me. Look, it's 2025. Trump is back in office, and some days it seems as if the sky is falling. There's so much uncertainty in the world right now, but I love that sitting down right here in front of this mic and letting the hard truths rumble out of my heart and off my chest is as certain as it ever was. Season 11 is gathering steam, and you're in for a real treat. Let me just tell you. When I reflect back on all the seasons that we dropped here at Black Like Me podcast, each of them has had a special purpose, a one-of-a-kind lineup of guests, and its own unique feel. I also think about the thread that binds them all together. What we do here at Black Like Me is unique. I don't have another space that feels just like this, where I can really speak from my unique perspective. And the guests who have on the show remark that these interviews they do here are unlike any others that they've done in other places. Sure, nobody else does Black Icebreakers, but that's only part of it. We have created a truly unique space here where honest conversations about the thoughts, the ideas, the policies that affect Black people and that Black people care deeply about. And you know what? It isn't easy. And I don't do this all alone. I have an incredible team that has steadily grown over the years, and each person that joins adds another asset to what we can do here. And all of you that support us on Patreon, my people, my people, my people. We simply would not be able to do what we do or get what we have gotten without you. So as we look to even bigger and better things in the coming season, please help support the show right now by clicking the link to Patreon in the show notes and join the community of people supporting this unique and provocative space. In the world that we're living in, where there's so much attack on our perspectives, our history, our bodies, and our lives and contributions, aren't you glad you have a place where you can still hear powerful, exhilarating, intellectual Black thought like you do? I enjoy it. And so if you do too, share the good news, tell friends, click that Patreon link now. Thank you so much for your support of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. As you look at faculty that you're responsible for as department chair, is it just the Black faculty that are linking arms and saying, let's stand against this? Are your non-Black faculty?
I think it's faculty at large across the country because they understand the assault is on higher education at large. The assault isn't just on an African American Studies department that I happen to be in, which has, literature folks, historians, artists, education specialists, sociologists, right, political scientists. It's on higher ed at large, right?
Yes,
because when you scale back and cancel national science foundations and national endowments for the humanities, these are grants that help keep lab lights on. This is how you fund graduate students in biology and in political science and in history, right? And so the assault is on higher ed.
Do you remember any time in recent history, or maybe not so recent history, where there's been a similar assault on education?
McCarthyism, right? Where you get all of these scholars that are, called to the table.
Wow. I hadn't even thought about that. I appreciate that. I'm just curious, are cohorts of fellow department chairs developing or jumping on Zooms to say, what are you guys doing in Michigan? What are you doing at Minnesota? What are you doing in Illinois? What do you do to not feel so alone in thinking through the strategies for withstanding this?
I think people have so far really just been in kind of like survival mode. What do we do? And waiting to see what cuts are coming. I mean, at UW-Madison, every unit was asked to do an exercise. And this is public knowledge, right? They released all of this. To what would it look like to cut 5%? What would it look like to cut 10%? And what this looks like is an assault on the quality of the education. So, for instance, if we need to have larger classes and less TAs, those are teaching assistants, that means the kind of assignments and assessments I do change. Instead of having a midterm and a final that is primarily essay-based, so you can really demonstrate to me that you understand the material, now I need to rely more on multiple choice and fill in the blank. So who does that actually end up impacting, right? If
Yes.
instead of having you write a 5 to 7 page paper, I have you write a 3 to 5 page paper. So now when you go to your employer, you have less clarity in your writing. You have a lessened ability to take a whole bunch of information and bring it down to it.
Right.
Like those are the kind of things that end up happening, right? Is that it affects the quality of education that we are able to deliver, because my teaching assistant has 20 hours a week that they can work, right? And so what I used to be able to ask of them if they had 75 students is different than what I can ask of them if they have 150.
Right.
And when you're thinking about medical trials
Mm-hmm.
and the number of graduate students who can work on a medical trial, well, okay. So when your grandmother needs some dementia medicines and drugs, now the delivery of that is slowed down considerably, or that drug is just not going to be tried at all because there's not enough graduate students to help run that trial.
Wow.
Right. And so it's that kind of aggregate that I think people are not thinking about. This isn't about
No,
like
I haven't
some
thought about it like that.
puffed up professor who is just, drawing a paycheck. That's not what this is about. Right. We don't have national labs in this country. We have Research One institutions that do that work.
Right. They don't exist
Right.
outside the academy.
Exactly. Because and that has been what made America an academic powerhouse, is let's invest in our university systems post-World War II. Let's put a ton of money in, more money than any other country had ever put into the public system, and see what happens. And what happens is innovation like the world never saw, because you have people that are allowed, who have the time and the space to think
Right.
for a living.
Right.
And it's a really beautiful thing to do. This is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to work at a Research One university, so I would have the time to think,
Wow.
right? And when we're pulling back resources from that, that's what you're pulling back, right? All of the things that we take for granted, from vitamin D to microwaves, was because some nerdy professor is sitting somewhere thinking about things.
Right.
Right?
Making
It
the
has the
world better.
time and the
Right.
ability to do that. Or they inspire some student, right?
You
And
know,
so, I mean, this stuff is critical.
I was gonna ask how far back revisionistic history and Black people go, but I want to reframe that for just a moment as I just talk out loud. So you have white Americans who decide to get on a boat and go to West Africa. Had they made up their minds who Black people were or weren't? Did they deduce that by interacting with them? And then did they start writing a crazy redacted history right away about how inept we were?
Let me ask for a clarifying question. If you're asking how we get to anti-Black racism and what becomes the United States,
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
It's a much more complex and convoluted story than that, right? Because you don't start seeing justifications for race-based slavery until after its creation, right?
Right.
Because that is what's weird about the history of slavery in the Americas. So North America, South America, and the islands in between. Slavery is as old as mankind. Right? You can, if we could get in a time machine and go to any continent that had any number of people on it, you would find unfree people.
Okay.
And that was true before anybody in Australia, Europe, Africa, the Americas knew that there were other people in other places.
Right.
Right? Unfreedom, exploitation is as old as war and destitution in human society.
Okay.
But race-based slavery is uniquely New World American. And actually begins its life in what we now refer to as the Caribbean and South America. North America is the last iteration of the plantation economy and race-based slavery. It was not the first, it's the last. It received the least number of people in the transatlantic slave trade. The vast majority are going to the islands in between North and South America and South America, which is why when you go to places like Brazil, Peru, Colombia today, you see people that look like us. Right? Because this is the first African diaspora.
Sure.
Right? And so race-based slavery served capitalism. It was an easy marker, and there seemed to be an inexhaustible supply of people, right? It had a tremendous demographic impact on Africa that Africa still has not recovered from. Like if you look at the number of people in West Africa, it is rather low, and people are often surprised by how few people are there. And it's because of the transatlantic slave trade. Most of the people who were sold in the transatlantic slave trade were captives of war. And so sometimes you'll hear someone say something really profoundly ignorant, like Africans sold themselves into slavery. That's like me saying during World War I and II, white people killed each other in Europe, as if they didn't see each other as distinct and different. The same thing in West Africa. You know, the Igbo and the Ashanti didn't see each other as the same, just like the French and the Italians didn't see each other as the same, right? And so race-based slavery really serves capitalism. What I mean by that is you start seeing these laws in the early colonial periods in South America, in the Caribbean, and then in North America, where it says children inherit the status of their mothers, which is weird coming from these European patriarchal societies.
Oh, exactly.
Right, that you're going to inherit the status. Well, why are they doing this? Because they want people to be born in bondage rather than buying them in bondage, right? Now they're going to be born in bondage, and now it's generational, right? So it serves capitalism. Right? It's this absurd system of, okay, you were born enslaved, and then your children are going to be born enslaved, and then your children's children, right? It creates this race-based generational.
Right.
And then you start seeing this is okay because they're not people the way we're people, which is also a patent lie because they treated them like people when it was to their advantage and didn't treat them like people when it wasn't.
Right.
And I like to give concrete examples, right? So if you are an enslaver and you happen to be a blacksmith or a mayor or a governor, then you're like, oh, let me teach them my trade, how to write, take notes, cipher. But then, oh, they're not really people, so now I can sell you or will you to my nephew, right? So it's very convenient.
Sure.
And when they did something wrong in court, oh, they got put on trial, they got asked questions, they got interrogated. If you really didn't think they were people, you wouldn't do that.
Right.
Nobody was taking a cow or a horse and putting them on trial, asking them questions about their feelings and motives, right? And so they were doing the mental gymnastics then in service of the almighty dollar, in service of capitalism, right? So you treat people as property when it's convenient, and you treat people as people when it's convenient. But you then start this rhetoric of it's okay to do this because they're not the same kind of person that I am.
Right.
And so it serves a purpose. You see the same thing for the dispossession of native land. Well, they're not people the way we're people, so we can take this land. Right. And so this is all a part of the justifications for capitalism, for colonialism.
With all of these changes taking place, the assaults on higher education in general, but particularly on advancements of Black people and people of color, how does this all impact your work as a public historian? Are you more worried about backlash because your work is prominent and public facing?
I'm not. This work has always been political. To tell the stories of Black people has always been under assault in this country, because to tell the story of Black people is to point out the shortcomings of the American Republic.
Yes, yes.
Right. And so I always begin my classes with something really simple for my students. How many of you know about the American Revolution? And they, all raise their hands. And I say, who was right? The Patriots or the Loyalists? And I'll say the Patriots. Mm-hmm. And I say, okay, but what if you were owned by a patriot? who's right. And they start looking at each other, and they look at me because that changes the question, right? And I said, now that's what we're going to do in this class. We're going to think about perspective. We're always going to be thinking about perspective. We're going to start in Jamestown, the same way you're used to starting in Jamestown, but we're going to start in Jamestown from the point of view of enslaved people rather than white colonists. And then we're going to throw in some Native people, and then we're going to ask questions about, is this a good thing? Because then that changes things.
Yes, it does.
And then we have to ask, well, but what if you were a woman, right? And so Black history points out the shortcomings of the nation, right? And I think that that's why there's such resistance to it, because you can't tell the simplistic, Disneyfied version of American progress if you include Black people. You have to X out those people, right? Like, you can't tell the great
True.
immigrant story if you also include Chinese people in the Exclusion Act, because now that's frustrating.
Right.
Right. You can't tell the upward story of citizenship and then point out that Native people don't have citizenship at large until 1924. Right. And so that's why there's this impulse to X out the stories of the people who were there. And then what you're then telling is incomplete. Right. You're not actually telling history. You're telling fantasy. If it's not messy, if it doesn't make you a little bit uncomfortable, it probably isn't fully true. Mm-hmm. It's probably partially true.
Does this crazy era make you want to bury your head, or does it make you want to dig in even more? And
It makes me want to dig in.
And say, all right, you want to mess with history? I'm going to put history someplace you can't mess with it. I
Yeah,
got your history.
It really makes me want to dig in. And it also makes me want to explain how historians come to the conclusions they do, because the things that people think are controversial are not among professional historians.
Really?
Right. Like, so me saying something like the U.S. Constitution is a freedom document and it's a pro-slavery document is only controversial when I'm talking to the general public. Mm-hmm. That is not something controversial when I'm talking to early American historians of the early American Republic.
They get it.
Because they've read the Constitution. And they're like, well, yeah. Well,
it's both.
It's both of those things. That's why we have a fugitive slave clause that's not called a fugitive slave clause. That's why we have the 1808 slave trade clause. That's why we have the Northwest Ordinance. Like, it's there. And so, there are folks who are saying, well, are you afraid that your sources will be taken away? I was like, well, then you're going to have to trash the Constitution and the state constitution.
And some people are not against that.
There are definitely folks that are not, right? And, but I'm always just struck by how folks who are often the loudest know the least, right?
Oh, definitely.
You get people that are talking about, let's go back to what the founders intended. Well, if we really want to go back to what the founders intended, the vast majority of Americans would not be voting. The vast majority of white Americans wouldn't be voting. The vast majority of white male Americans wouldn't be voting, because if we go all the way back to 1787 and the first voting laws that are passed in the 1790s, there were property qualifications. So the vast majority of white men weren't voting.
Because they didn't hold property or own property.
Now, if you fast forward 50 years, the property qualifications fall. But if you go back to 1790, most white men did not qualify to vote because our founders were elitist, right? And their understanding was only people who are truly free should vote. Meaning, if you were a renter, if you worked for somebody else, you're not truly free, so you shouldn't be able to vote. And the property qualifications were high. And you couldn't have mortgages. You had to own stuff outright. And so, I'll hear, especially, working class or middle class white men and women say this. And I'm just looking at them like, you wouldn't, in the time machine and put you back in 1795, you wouldn't qualify.
Right. And then we'd ask you, are we great yet? You want a hat? Are we great yet?
Like, you wouldn't have qualified to vote. You rent or have a mortgage you can barely afford. So
people talking about going back to when America was great don't even
when
know their
was this
history.
date?
Exactly.
I'm always and great for whom?
Well,
that is
that
always
we do know.
the question.
That we do know.
When the good old days for who?
For the Colonel and his crew.
Yeah, but when we go back to the really early American, like, it was such a small number of people that like had access, which is why we had so much violence and riots throughout the first half of the 19th century to expand the right to vote. 1790, most white men don't qualify to vote. By the time we get to 1840, most do, right? Like, and talking about the past as if it were ever static. Like, things were ever changing all the time, right? Like, okay, so when did most people get it right? Well, property qualifications fell first in the Northeast, although some states held on a long time. Rhode Island doesn't drop its property qualification to 1842.
Really?
Right? Like, that's when, like these things, you don't have universal male suffrage in Rhode Island to 1842.
You know, with all of these erasures going on, I was talking about, that these records are largely digital. So, you would think that it's almost impossible to fully erase. But do you think it's possible to erase history in some part?
I don't, because most of the records, like if you go to an archive, most archives have less than 20% of their archive digitized.
Less than 20%?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, the National Archives is largely a paper collection. And there's also printed volumes of primary sources. There's also historians that have been doing this work and, publish and printing either parts of, letters, diaries, laws they've written. Like, it's so diffuse that that isn't something I worry about. What I worry about is access. I worry about access to the archives. I worry about the protection of records. So we have to keep these places temperature controlled, right?
Right.
Paper breaks down, right? So it's those kinds of things.
Sure.
And so when we are scaling back the amount of money for the National Archives, well, what does that mean for temperature-controlled rooms that have all of these records in them? If we're firing people who organize these documents, well, then that affects who's able to access them and what finding aids are available. If we're making it's so difficult to go to graduate school unless your family can fully fund you the entire time, the questions that are being asked, right? And so for me, it's really those bigger questions. If you want to scrub a website, well, we can fix that. But if the paper breaks down, we got a problem.
Yes. I think when you were here last time, we talked about the fact that you had an article in the Journal of American History. And so every time I bring that up, I have to congratulate you, because that's the premier periodical for your field, and it takes a look at your work out in the community. So I'm curious, as we see these assaults on education and history, and it becomes threatened or people are threatening to erase it, who then becomes the holder of this history? Is it the community, like the public? Is it in places like our Justified Anger history class? Is it history departments? Is it private citizens?
I think it's all of this. I think it's all of the above, right? As many people as there are that are trying to roll things back and to make folks quiet, there are also people who are really invested in that not happening.
Okay.
And I think the best ways that they can support that not happening is to invest in units and spaces that have always done this work. Nehemiah has always done this work. So invest in Nehemiah, right? Donate to Nehemiah. The Department for African American Studies has been doing this work for 55 years come September. They did this work when it was recognized. They did this work when it was celebrated. They did the work when it was not celebrated. Invest in those units
That's a
that
great
have
message.
always done this work. Right? That you don't have to invest in something new. Who's always done this work?
Invest in them. I love
The
that.
HBCUs have always done this work. You want your donations to go far? Invest in units that have always done the work.
I love that. That's such a great response. To the extent that some history or elements of history has been redacted, who's responsible for restoring that? You know, is that different in the academy than it is out in society?
I think it's all of us. I mean, it has made me want to write more. It has
I
made
love
my
that.
commitment to public history because a lot of this also is a response to it was working.
Yes.
Your kids were asking you uncomfortable questions. Your grandkids were asking you uncomfortable questions. We got to shut this down. If it was of no consequence, you wouldn't be trying to shut me up.
Right. Right. That's how you know that it's.
That's how I know it's
effective.
working. That's how I know that it's important and it matters.
We know that your public history is important to the community. Is it important to the academy?
You know, I have the fortune of being in an institution that has remained supportive. I'm not interested in what units. I'm not interested in what institutions say. I'm interested in what institutions do. And my institution supported 2 hires this year. That's what I'm
Right.
interested in.
Have you always been interested in public history, like as you were going into your PhD program, or is it something that changed? And if so, what was the cause of that pivot?
I was interested, but I didn't know how to do it. That's not until a man by the name of Dr. G tasked me to do something that I thought wouldn't work and that I couldn't do. Several years ago when you asked me to, take something that I do in 15 weeks and distill it down into 3 or 4 different lectures.
In February in the evening.
Yes. And I was thinking, yeah, no, this is not going to work. And I was spectacularly wrong. So I've always been interested. I would do a lecture here and there, but I really didn't know how to teach a public history class until I started working with Justified Anger.
Wow.
And that changed the trajectory of my career. It changed my personal life because it gave me the space and it challenged me to do it differently. And so I'm really appreciative of that.
Well, we're appreciative as well. Not, sounding your own horn or throwing colleagues under the bus, but for other Americanists across the country, what percentage of them would you guess, of tenured faculty, would you suppose were doing public-facing history?
That's really hard for me to say because now that I'm doing this, I increasingly surround myself with people who are. And this is what I'll say by that, because I just don't want to try to give a shot in the dark.
Sure.
Not all academics need to do public work,
Right.
but I think a good quarter of us need to.
Okay.
And I think beyond that, the institutions, the colleges and the universities we work for need to acknowledge and support and celebrate that work. Most academics don't do public-facing work because it is not something that is rewarded by institutions. If you want to get tenure, if you want to be promoted to full professor, the pathway there often does not include public engagement,
Right.
which is why so many academics don't do public engagement, aren't good at public engagement, and also we have had no training in public engagement.
Right.
Like when I was in graduate school, they had just started this kind of public history programs here or there, but that was for non-serious people. We weren't trained to do this, right? And so the people who have gone into it, they usually had some kind of personal passion or, someone had challenged them in some kind of way to get there, but they're also working within institutions that don't acknowledge, celebrate, or support it. Right. And so there's a reason why there's so few public facing academics, because we weren't trained for it. And it often isn't rewarded. That's not how you get tenure.
And not only is it not rewarded, it's used against you. I mean, if someone's so busy doing community work that they're not being published or following some of the other criterion for receiving tenure, you can actually look back and say, "Oh, I spent too much time in the community. I spent too much time being community facing."
And that's a tension that is real, because I think about my junior faculty and how I have counseled some people. Okay, you need to pull back a bit, because we want you here after you get, we want you to get tenure. And then once you get tenure, you can do that. And my story is very similar. When did I get heavy into public history? After I was tenured. When I could afford to do it.
Sure.
From just a professional point of view. Because it does take a lot of energy and engagement. And I could see how that could have derailed tenure for me. Right? And then you're not there to continue that work, because you got one shot at tenure. You don't get multiple chances.
You get one shot and then you're gone.
Yes. And you're not going to go to another institution after you didn't get tenure at one institution. Right? And so the stakes are really high. But the problem with that model is you get into that mode of, this is the kind of work that is rewarded. And so you don't have that many people who then venture out.
Sure.
Right? It's something that I appreciate about my institution is we have something called the Wisconsin idea.
Yes.
So we have something enshrined within the university that says that we care about public engagement. And so we can remind the university, hey, remember the Wisconsin idea? That's what I'm doing.
As long as you're tenured.
Yeah, but that's also unique. Right. It's something that really drew me to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, was this idea that we should be impactful outside of the classroom.
Right.
That's a unique Wisconsin thing.
I just assumed that was, I think having gone to school here, having worked here, I just assumed that that's what universities did. So that's great. It's great to hear that. You know, a little bit earlier, Dr. Clark-Pujara, we talked about, I asked who's responsible for holding the history. Is it the academy or the community? And you said all the above. Then who coordinates that group to say we are jointly responsible? Because I think we're looking to we being the community looks to the academy looks to the community. So who's going to round us up so we can sit down and have that discussion?
I think we need those spaces in between, right?
Yes.
Of people that are really engaged in community work within the academy. And this makes me think of someone who you are increasingly working more with, right? Dr. Jessica Stovall.
Yes.
Right? Like, her education lab is doing exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
It's bridging that gap between the community and the academy. You did one of her interviews.
Yes.
Okay, now it's going to be available through the university website and kept there.
Yes.
Right? Like, it is exactly that. Gotcha. All of those interviews that are being done in the education lab are going to be made available to the public while they sit on a university server, right? And so it is that middle work. It's finding folks like that and then supporting them with everything we have.
Sure.
Because they're already doing
I love that.
That work, right? And, you know, it's also training other people to do that work, because as you know from going to her class is full of what? Graduate students and undergraduate students who are learning how to do what she does.
Yes.
That's how we do it.
And I think the community has to continually be reminded by the academy. You're an important part of keeping the history, because we've
and
never...
we have to keep our own stories with our elders.
Sure. Because we're not told that.
Have you interviewed your grandparents?
Yes.
Right? You can go to StoryCorps and things like that and get those questions and get your cell phone out. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that can be valuable for a historian 20, 30, 100, 200 years from now. It's, you know, partnerships between, you know, the Center for Black Excellence and the Department of African American Studies.
Yes.
Like, we're trying to build that partnership.
I mean, this discussion is putting that partnership in a whole different context for me. Like, I spoke with Dr. Stovall yesterday, but in light of this conversation, I'm realizing this isn't just about providing space for ideas she has. It's keeping us at the table as folks who are helping to maintain this history,
And it's
retain this
literally
history.
building an archive.
Yes.
An archive that is held not just by the university, but by the Center for Black Excellence.
Yes.
Right? And that creates a buffer for, if it gets taken from the university, well, it's still somewhere else, right? These kinds of partnerships between the university and community organizations like the Center for Black Excellence are essential. What we need is more funding, right? To make sure that this work continues.
We're going to make sure that we put a link in this in the notes for this episode that will help people to make a donation to the Department of African American Studies for the University of Wisconsin-Madison, because they're hearing this and they're being stirred and they're wanting to know what they can do. And we're going to put that link so people my listeners can.
Yeah, because we want to be supportive of that work. And something that I have talked
and we want to be supportive of your work.
Dr. Stovall about is that the work that she's doing in the community has to count toward tenure. Because if not, then you just burn people out.
Exactly.
And I've seen it happen too often, right?
And the community loses out. I mean, we're 2.5 miles south of where your offices are. And if we can't build that link between the department, your department, and the heart of the Black community, then the reach of this campus is probably not going out around the state and around the world like they wanted to. Like, we can do good together, but in light of all of this, I mean, I was going to ask you a question, but you've answered it. In this chaotic time, is there anything good that can come out of it? Absolutely. And it could be strategic partnerships like what we're doing with Dr. Stovall in our departments, or you're inviting me, having you invite me to join the faculty as an adjunct to teach history.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because we need
which
a
I've
Center
loved.
for Black
I love
Excellence,
doing.
Right? So when I say we, I'm talking about the Department of African American Studies. We need the Center for Black Excellence. The university needs the Center for Black Excellence.
Yes.
And we need the community.
Yes.
We need the community to tell us what they need from us.
Right. And
for them to feel safe to send their students to us, to send their kids to us, right? That this is not we're at the university and we're going to tell you how to make things better. You need to tell us how we need to change our institution to make things better as well.
That is the Wisconsin idea.
Yeah, and I don't think that's always been the Wisconsin idea, but that's my understanding of the Wisconsin idea. It has to be a two-way street. We have to earn trust. We have to build relationships. And that takes time, and it also takes us listening.
Sure, because I think in decades gone by, mainly what the university needed from the community was tuition, and good legislative support. And so I think that there are those who read the Wisconsin idea, thinking we're going to take all of this knowledge and take it out to the community. But as I read it, the thought was that there would be some exchange that by the community
has knowledge that we need in the academy.
Exactly. And the academy, if it's in the community, can bring that knowledge back.
Yes.
But because there's no real clear entry point for the community to come up to Bascom Hill and say, this is what we want you to know, we almost have to wait for you to ask us to dance before we dance and say, hey, here's the kind of music we think needs to be played. So I think we're at a very pivotal moment where if we work together well, like we're endeavoring to do, it could make a huge difference. I was speaking recently with an author. It's one of my favorite authors. He's a New York Times bestseller. He's done that twice. He sold screenplays, and he was congratulating me on the work of the center in reaching our capital campaign goals, $31 million that we just reached. And I didn't know this, but he said, been following your work. I took your online class. So he starts telling me about stuff that he's learned in your class, Dr. Clark-Pujara. Here's a New York Times bestseller calling me down in Mexico, saying, hey, I like what you've been doing and blah, 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 blah. And then he starts talking about the history class. And I said, well, maybe this means like he's read some articles about history, until he started talking. And then he started quoting specific things like, I didn't know that white churches let their members out early to go see a lynching. So I started thinking he's talking about the history, the Black history for a new day. So I want you to know, as your department chair, that your public history facing work, your public history work, is not just impacting Madison, but because of technology, we brought people in, who can absorb this material virtually, and they're around the world talking about what they're learning through technology and public history. So I think I just want you to hear that as a reminder that in the midst of all of this craziness, your work and the impact of your faculty and of your innovation and your willingness to try something new, even though you thought it wasn't going to work, you were still very respectful and you showed up to give it a try. But you have no idea how many people are being touched and who are listening to history in ways they've never learned it. He's a writer. He's a theologian. He was raised up in Texas. He trained at a very conservative theological seminary. Yet he's rethinking everything, including church history and American history, because of listening to your lectures through our website.
Well, that's really amazing to think about, and I really thank you for the opportunity of doing that because I meant it when I said that, Justified Anger changed my career and how I thought about what was possible, what was important, and how I could be impactful. And so I'm just grateful to have been part of it and continue to be a part of it.
Well, I am too. And I just want to thank you again for allowing me the space to be an adjunct faculty. It was probably...
we will be having you back.
I hope so. It was a place of great... a little nervousness and fear, consternation, but also great joy. The students were great, and it took a minute to hit my stride because it's different than giving speeches and giving sermons, but I felt that I grew. So it wasn't just that I got to take the information about the center and Nehemiah into a new space, but I got a chance to grow in doing that, and it made me take my work more seriously. Not that I don't respect it, but I realize my work has now been curricularized, if that's a word. If not, I'll coin that phrase. But curricularized, like these students now have notes and documents and about how I did what I did, and they studied it and they wrote about it and regurgitated back to me in their paper. And not many community influencers get to have their work taught in an academy or have their work presented in an academy while they're still alive, and then they get to teach it too. So there's at least a three-prong benefit of that. So I really appreciate it. I look forward to doing some more work together, and I really respect what you're doing and appreciate you being in the studio today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always fun to have a conversation with you.
Yes, and keep fighting, and the faith, and when all of these attacks on education, something good's got to come out of it, and as crazy as it is to see what's happening in the world, it's like I have this excitement that's been reserved to say something really good and redemptive is going to bounce out of this, and the academies and the communities are going to connect. We're going to realize we need Black and brown people at the table, and I'm just thinking that our hard work is not going to go unrewarded, and so I really appreciate that.
I agree.
Listen, I just want to say to folks out here, I want you to check our new public-facing group on Facebook, because you can do more than just hear about it here, but you can actually have discussion. So come join the discussion, or just take a look at what others are talking about. I'm not just here about myself, but I have a great team that work with me to bring every episode to you. We have worked together to bring every episode together with great excellence and care. That is Eli Steenlich and Jeremy Holliday, who produce and edit the show. Mr. Don Thornton secures our great guests, like the one we had in the studio today. Ariana Proctor curates and moderates our listener space. She's waiting for you. And Jakisha Hunt, who handles our wonderful podcast merchandise. To those of you who support us through Patreon, I really appreciate the fact that you're doing that. And thank you for caring enough about the quality and the content of the show to commit on a monthly basis your financial support. For others, you can do that for as little as $2 a month. Click that link today. Be a part of what we're doing at a greater level. And to all of the listeners, you really make this worthwhile. And I want you to lean in. I want you to share this, write comments, visit the public-facing space, but also share this with friends. You know people who need to hear this discussion. They need to have things put in context. So share this information. Be the change that you want to see. So thank you all for making Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G a complete joy. Have a great day, and I look forward to being back with you again soon.
Black Like Me. Black Like Me.
want to thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. If you like that opening track of our theme song, you can show your appreciation to Corey Saffold, who created that and produced it, and Marcus Fleming, my cousin, who's on vocals. I also want to say that this podcast was started with the generous support of the Human Family Unity Foundation, and so we always want to stop and thank them for that. For the many patrons who support us through our Patreon page, thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't just listen, but you support, you lean in, and you help this podcast to be what it is. And then I need to thank you, the listeners, who make a point of downloading this, listening to it, and sharing it. Without all of you, this podcast would not be what it is and what it's becoming. Thank you so much.